Let me just ask, if I may, well, let me clarify. My husband's family owns this. I stay away. I show up for free food and free pop. His dad was a World War II pilot, knew being across the airport was a place to be. So, and the staff is amazing, absolutely amazing. So we're glad you were here. Thank you very much for that. I want to ask, are there any any veterans here? Any veterans? Would you please stand? I know you're eating, but would you please stand so we can thank you? Secure them, and we thank you so much for that. Legislators, I know we have several. Here from Iowa, if you're a legislator from Iowa, will you stand? Current or past? Add to that, legislators or elected officials across the nation. Any more legislators, past or present? Present or past? Thank you for your work in guarding our liberties at the State House. You are the gateway. Are there any pastors? One in the back, a young man we all know and appreciate. Anybody else? Let me just say, friends, that is part of our challenge, isn't it? When the pastors get what we're up against and the war we're in, and it's spiritual as well as on the ground here, that's when we'll start to win again. Right? All right, then I want to say thanks to all of you, the grassroots. You are the ones that make the difference. You are the one raising tomorrow's leaders, raising grandkids who know the history. What history you have, please share it. I'm eavesdropping on conversations. History here that is not taught anymore, or if it is, you know and I know it's twisted. Teach what you know to your children and your grandchildren, and make sure they know what makes America great. God doesn't bless her because she's great. She's great because God has blessed her. Okay, now to our program. It's my honor to get to lead you tonight in the rest of this program. First, I'm going to introduce Bill Cherry. Bill grew up in Texas, attended Texas Tech and Southern Methodist University, and achieved a degree from SMU in Advanced Traffic and Transportation. He joined the John Birch Society in 1964, served as chapter leader and section leader in Dallas, and was hired as the JBS coordinator in Oklahoma in 1968. In 1979, he was made regional director for Southeast United States and moved to Georgia. He later served as the department staff, with the department staff of JBS, and returned to Texas. He now lives in Richardson, Texas, and continues to work for JBS. For the past 14 years, he's been doing a weekly radio program through an all-talk state radio station in Texas. Please help me welcome Bill Cherry.
Friends of mine who I was coming up here for this meeting, they both said the same thing. They didn't know each other, that they had been some of the nicest people up here in Des Moines they've ever met. And I know what you're talking about. It's really great being here. Well, as they mentioned, I was a coordinator up in Oklahoma for the John Birch Society. And I got called and by the head office, and they asked me, they said, we'd like you to move to Georgia and to move into Larry McDonald's district and work half your time in Larry McDonald's district down there, and the other half I could oversee the 7 Southeast states for him. And I got thinking, I said, well, 2 full-time jobs, I guess I better not complain too much. I have something to fall back on. So I took off, went to Georgia. We moved into Marietta, Georgia, which was in the northwest section of Atlanta, northwest section of Atlanta, in Larry's territory, the congressional district, which was the 7th congressional district of Georgia. And it took in basically the northwest corner of the state, from northwest Atlanta on north and east and west, and rapidly growing area. Well, I had heard about Larry, but this time I was working with him now. And as we worked together, I got to know him. He was a medical doctor. His family had a medical clinic, I think it was a urology clinic in the Atlanta area. It was run by his dad. And he trained up and became a doctor himself. And as he was practicing, of course, he learned about the John Birch Society. He joined the society, got active locally, and began to reach out to other people in the area. And in the meantime, I was getting to know him while I was through the area, and we were working together. Here's one thing he did for us. It was very unique. He was a congressman up in Georgia. Went to Washington quite a bit. But he gave us one weekend a month to hold a special presentation of the John Birch Society in the territory. And it usually was the first weekend of every month. And what we would do is we would usually pick a house, somebody's house. The weather was always pretty good in Georgia, so we would usually have a backyard barbecue and invite the prospects that we have. And Larry McDonald would make the presentation. We'd show the film at that time, and then Larry McDonald would make the appeal for membership. And we started growing in that district. Well, as it was growing, Larry announced that he'd like to take another step and run for Congress. And we looked, well, it wasn't me, I wasn't there just at that time, but they looked at the membership in the territory it was in, the congressional district, and it had about members in it. And said, well, you might want to wait, we're growing, yes, we need to reach more people. We had a goal at that time of 1,000 members in a congressional district. And that's what we were working throughout the country in some areas of the country. But Larry decided to run anyway, and he did. He lost by about 3,000 votes. Well, other than just sit back, he picked up his film projector, got the Birch literature, went out, recruiting, taking all of the time he could to help us from the clinic. He ran the second time. He won. We had over 600 members in the district that second time. And he would win by larger margins as we continued to grow in that district. The last time he ran was in 1982. He won it in, I guess you call it a landslide today, over 60% of the vote. And it was what we did in those congressional districts that set the whole tone to build that membership list in that district. In '82, I asked our home office, what is our numbers of our membership in that congressional district today? It's 1,200 members. And it just absolutely frustrated the left to no end. They couldn't understand how this was happening outside the political parties. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper is an extremely left-wing paper. We used to kid about it being the southern edition of Providence. And they came out after Larry won in '82 with an editorial. In essence, what it was, what are we going to do? What's happening up here in the 7th District of Georgia? These right-wing birches and everything have taken over the area. We go up there, there's Get Us Out of the United Nations signs all over the congressional district, support your local police signs. We talk to mayors and city council members, and they're members of the Birch Society. We go to their meetings, and they're not political. They're talking about the Constitution, like they couldn't believe how that would happen, and they're not dependent on the political party. And then they end up just literally saying, what do we do? How do we stop this?
because they're used to manipulating everybody in the political parties and party leadership and everything. And here, they couldn't even touch us. They did play a little gimmick about Larry in two of his re-election campaigns that we see today. They had him arrested a couple of days before the election day. One, with election day coming up on Tuesday, they arrested him on Friday, mainly on some trumped up charge, just to keep him from campaigning. And he won anyway. And they did it one other time too. In fact, it was interesting that time they arrested him on a Saturday. They took him to the judge for Monday afternoon and presented their case, and the judge threw the whole thing out and read the riot act to him. It was just a political gimmick to keep him from campaigning, but he won anyway. But one of the things that set the foundation in that district was the use of our trip bulletin. That's Tax Reform Immediately Bulletin, where we score the congressman on his voting record. We didn't tell you whether he's a Republican or a Democrat on that bulletin, but we score. Did he vote for more government or less government? Did he support the Constitution or not? And there usually was about 8 to 10 votes on there, and you could look at that, and the last column listed what that vote cost you or saved according to how he voted. And through the chapters in the area, and through the help of some chapters in the Atlanta area, we would meet in a room. It was about as big as the room we were in this afternoon. We'd have 60 to 80 members of the Birch Society in there. We would spend the whole evening putting these trip bulletins in a plastic bag with a sheet about trimming the John Birch Society to go with it. And then down there in that whole district, all the mailboxes were on a post up by the curb. So we load these black bags up with these, fill the trunks up, send people out in pairs. They would drive up and down the street and throw the plastic bag by the base of the mailbox. We did 3 distributions of $100,000, 100,000 distribution each time. And it was just something the left couldn't overcome. They couldn't understand how this was all happening. And of course, can't keep in mind, Larry was a Democrat the whole time. The Republican Party was just getting established. In fact, when I moved into the area there, I asked something about the Republican Party, and they kind of joked and said, well, there's not much here. We're going to have our kind of convention in the phone booth. And that's about the extent of what the Republican Party's influence was at that time. So Larry, he worked hard for the Birch Society. He was principal. He'd come back and do special evening meetings for us too on the topics. And I loved to watch him on TV when he'd be on CNN or something like that. He was ripping the guy, somebody apart, but he was doing it in a way that was not shouting or yelling at him, just taking the facts and taking the guy apart that he was arguing with and talking to. Well, it was a Saturday night in 1983, and Larry was giving a talk in the evening, and he asked if I would get the coordinator together and one other person together and myself to join for dinner. And we were having we were eating before the meeting that night, and he said, I wanted to tell you what my plans are for the future. And he says, I think I'm probably going to run for Congress 1 or 2 more times. He says, that will depend on my seniority, because I'm high up in seniority on the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And he said, there's a chance through somebody getting defeated or retiring that I could end up chairman of that committee in the next 2 to 4 years. He says, I'll have to just think about that as it goes along. But he says, I want you to know what I'm thinking about after that. He said, after that, I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate in Georgia. And he says, probably will run 2 terms and then think very seriously about making a run for the presidency somewhere in the late 1990s. which would have been very interesting if you'd looked at what the political situation was looking back on that. But he says, I just want you to know, but it can't shift. Things will change politically, but that's what my overall plans are. And then he said that, we asked him a question, and the fella asked him, he says, I understand you're going over to South Korea with Jesse Helms, Senator, Congressman Ashbrook from Ohio, and Stevens Sims, who became senator from Idaho, to represent the United States on a mutual defense pact treaty that we have with South Korea. For some reason, our State Department was snubbing it, was not going to send anybody over there. And Jesse Helms decided, well, we needed to have our representatives there because South Korea and Taiwan are critical. And Larry said, I'm calling Jesse tomorrow, I can't make it. I just can't go with him. And he says, I just got so many things going on politically that I got to give attention to. Well, we said goodbye and went our way. Well, the first of that week, I was doing some work privately in my office, going over some lists on the virtual side, and they had the radio on. And they broke in with a special report about a Korean flight plane being shot down in the Sakhalin Island area. And that there was a U.S. Congressman on board. And that's all I heard, U.S. Congressman on board. And I said, what's happening here? So I started fishing around, and the news was very sparse. I was listening to all over the United States trying to find some information. Finally, they mentioned that the congressman was Larry McDonald. And I said, well, I thought four of them were going around. I thought Larry was not going. So I called one of the people in his office. And of course, they were upset and everything, and I asked them about it, and this is what they told me. They said Larry had called Senator Jesse Helms and said he couldn't go, and Jesse pleaded with him to go. And Larry finally relented and said, okay. And so they were all going to meet in New York. Larry was flying out of Atlanta, New York. They were coming from Washington, New York, and they were all going to be on the same plane, flying to Alaska to be refueled and then flying over to South Korea from them. Well, what happened, Larry's plane was delayed because of bad weather in Atlanta. And the plane was late taking off, and he missed the connection. The other three were in the plane he was supposed to be in taken off, and his plane took off somewhere, they say, it looked like about maybe the one he was on, they refueled, and it was about 45 minutes to an hour behind his, behind the other plane. But Larry didn't, he didn't know where that other plane was, and they didn't know where Larry was either. So the planes landed in Anchorage, Alaska, and Jesse Helms and them, they got off as a refueled. They didn't know Larry was in the plane behind them, coming in later behind them. And just about the time that they refueled and took off, Larry's plane landed. And Larry just stayed on the plane and slept. And so they never got connected, knew who was doing what. Larry's plane was refueled, and he took off. And they said they probably were maybe 30 minutes apart on the flight. And then we get into an area that the media made it tough to figure out what was going on. But basically what had happened is the Russians picked up on the aircrafts. And I later found out, yes, they watched all the flights going into Korea. And they sent up a squadron to trail them and watch them. And so that's what they did. And the pilot came back and he said, what are our orders? Are we just trailing or what? That they're going to be getting out of a protective area, and what should we do? And nothing came back. And the pilot rated again for the same appeal, and the fellow on the other end, apparently was a high officer, said to the point that There's 3 of them on the first plane, there's 2, and there's 1 on the second plane, hit the second plane. And so he took a shot at the plane. We don't know what damage was done to the plane. The plane descended about somewhere around 12 to 14,000 feet, but leveled off. And they said that probably was decompression from the plane being hit. And the pilot, the Russian pilot, came back and said they seemed to have leveled off, and there seemed to be flying some a pattern leading to some base. And the officer said, take another shot at it. And the pilot came back and said, I can't. The clouds are too heavy. I can't hardly even see them. And he tried again. He said, I just can't do it. I can't see them. They're too low. Well, the radar, which we saw later, the signature of the radar showed the plane coming down and then leveling off at about 1,000 feet and flying apparently adjusting pattern to come in and land somewhere. And which turned out to be, as far as we know, Sakhalin Island. But that brought up a question in my mind. I said, did the Russians know everybody on that plane? How do they know? So I contacted a member of the John Birch Society with Pan Am Airways in Atlanta. Yeah, it's in Atlanta. And I asked him about this. I said, do you all know everybody that's on every flight? This was pre-computer days, no? He said, yeah, there's no doubt about it. And we know the Soviets watched everybody on every flight over there, and we can get the manifest for any flight we want to anytime. And then shortly after that, there was an article that came out about the Russians had a base on the West Coast, and that's all they did was keep track of everybody flying from out of the United States over to Korea, China, and that area over there. So that made me think that they knew it was Larry. Did they do it because he was going to be chairman of this young, the House Committee on American Activities, so there's a good chance on that? Did they do it because of the political future he would have? Because he was mustering strength among the conservative movement, politically, with both Republicans and Democrats. And there have been no doubt about it, he would have won that race for the U.S. Senate in Georgia, the way it turned out in '86. He would have won that thing. And it was a learning experience for me to see the dedication of this man, to see what we could do in the membership in the John Birch Society and the grassroots level to literally change. And listen, that whole thing changed that state. And as you know, the state eventually turned Republican, not some of the greatest Republicans in the world, at least there was a battle going on down there. And hated to lose Larry McDonald. And we always wondered what happened. There was an article that came out in Pravda newspaper in the early 1990s. I think it was about 92, 93. And it said that it was on Flight 7. And Pravda is the official newspaper of Russia at that time. And it said that the plane had been hit, but had come in for a landing and landed in Sakhalin Island, the base there. And they had stripped all electronics off and stripped the whole plane, literally tore it apart, shoved it aside, and I guess the junk pile and hauled it away. Never did they mention pilots, passengers, anything. Nothing was ever mentioned in the article. Well, there was a fellow in Israel, Abraham Shifrin, and he was doing a study and writing books and keeping records of people that escaped from the gulags in China. I mean, not China, in Russia. And he was, everybody that escaped, he would interview them. They would tell him what gulag he was in and the escape route, how they got out. He traced all this out. So he was interviewing one guy one time, and he says, hey, just while I was at the base there, just before I escaped, there was a big rumor going around that there was a whole bunch of people coming in from a dying airplane flight. And he said that's all he knew about it. Well, shortly after that, he was interviewing another one, that escaped, and he said a little more. He says, yeah, they brought him into where he was at the base, at the gulag, and they wouldn't let anybody there that was holding prisoners even be mixed with them. And they were supposed to be from a down airplane flight, but there was one guy there that they would not let anybody talk to him. They kept him completely separate from everybody. And Schifrin asked what the guy looked like. And from the description, it could have been Larry McDonald. That's possible. But that's all we know about it today. What happened to all those people? That was the last article I think Russia ever came out with on the on KAL 007. So that shows you what we're faced with today. I think it shows you the determination of the globalists today. Of course, the battle has changed to some extent today as far as alliances and everything. And they go to the point where they'll kill congressmen, kill elected officials to get their way. And you'd have to be living in that area to understand why they might have done that, because the left hated that House Committee on Un-American Activities. And I think the last thing they wanted was Larry McDonald as the head of it. So keep Larry in mind, because it just happened just a few days from now. And say a prayer for him and his family. His wife lives in Georgia, like a neighbor of Mr. Morrow over here. And his son is in the area too. And we're working and building the John Birch Society. And keep in mind what they did with that trim bulletin back there in those districts. That we can do the same thing today with our scoreboard issued on the congressmen and senators. Get those things distributed, because this is the time to start. Don't wait for one distribution before the election. Do it now. Do it every 4 months. And we just had grand times getting together in this big room, and we had refreshments, do all this work to put it together, and get them out and distribute it, and see the results of it too. So we appreciate you all here very much. Keep up the good work. I think we have a very critical period ahead of us, and I think we're going to make a lot of gains. And I think we're going to see some things happen on the positive side as far as growth and activity in the months ahead that we've never seen in the past. It's beginning to happen. Thank you.
KAL 007, you are cleared for takeoff. Have a good flight. KAL 007, that's Roger.
I'm coming before you tonight about the Korean airline massacre, the attack by the Soviet Union against 269 innocent men, women, and children aboard an unarmed Korean passenger plane. This crime against humanity must never be forgotten, here or throughout the world. Our prayers tonight are with the victims and their families in their time of terrible grief. Our hearts go out to them, to brave people like Catherine McDonald, the wife of a congressman, whose composure and eloquence on the day of her husband's death moved us all. He will be sorely missed by all of us here in government.
So your dad, as I'm sure you know, is something of a hero. He was, in my opinion, one of the best congressmen of American history. Have you kind of continued in your dad's footsteps? Are you active at all in the fight for freedom?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that was ingrained in me. I think it was probably ingrained in me before I was able to talk. So I am just actually so thankful that I have memories of my father still, even though I was very young when he passed. But I do remember going to the Capitol with him. I'm just very thankful for that.
Larry McDonald, of course, was the chairman of the board of the John Birch Society back in the very early 80s. He was raised in a Birch family. And so he went, he started out as a young bircher, went through medical school, so forth. And then he got the idea of running for Congress. So it took him a few years. He built chapters of the John Birch Society, ran, got defeated, ran again, got elected. It was such a strong base they couldn't get rid of him. I mean, they really wanted this guy out of Congress because it wasn't that Larry was simply a bircher, he was an organizer.
The real problem in this country is not with Washington. The real problem has been in the homes and the living rooms of America. We do not understand. We do not have knowledge. We have not had, at a sufficient level, an informed electorate. The Washington power politics, guided by the conspiracy, is a reflection of a lack of an informed electorate. Thus, in my opinion, education indeed is the key. Effective education gives the groundwork for the development of an informed electorate. With a sufficiently informed electorate, you're able to have victory in the political arena, a restoration of the republic, and a revitalization of Western civilization. Without that powerful body of an informed electorate, we will see a destruction of the American dream, our republic, and our civilization.
Now, with this explosive growth of new money, that means, of course, inflation. And I know that many people are being led to believe that politicians in Washington during the political season are going to save us from the ravages of inflation. Perhaps if you only remember one thing tonight, I hope you will remember at least this, that politicians do not fear inflation. They love it, because inflation is the mechanism that allows them to expand the currency, to satisfy or to make up the deficits that allow them to pay for the expanding federal program to satisfy the special interest groups to guarantee their elections. Who causes inflation? Well, two groups. Counterfeiters can cause inflation when they run off pieces of paper in their basement, printing them up, passing them out in society, because by so doing, they steal from society as a whole. Federal government, to make up the deficits, servicing the deficits, and creating new money, whether by direct printing press, or bookkeeping entry, or borrowing from the capital markets, also is passing out new money without backing. The principle of immorality remains the same. This tremendous growth in inflation, in government, has brought us the deficits and debt exactly that as feared by Thomas Jefferson and many other of our founding fathers, to where today we have the greatest debt in the history of the world.
But I think it's important to vote according to the basic principles, and I would hope that more people would judge their representatives according to how they vote rather than party label. And I think most people are getting away from the nonsense of the party label.
What are the goals of the John Birch Society?
Well, in a nutshell, I think it stands for less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Now remember, I know that sort of sounds like a cliche. The society feels that the best form of government ever devised was that which our founding fathers gave us, was that of a constitutional republic at the midpoint of the political spectrum, showing the extremes of both right and left. The best form of an economic system was free enterprise. It's given more prosperity to more people than any other system. And I think the best form of a moral basis of society has been that built on a biblical basis, and these are our basic values. I think the society feels that there are certain legitimate functions of government, especially the protection of life and property. But it is not a legitimate function of government to take from one person and transfer constantly wealth to another. And if you're going to have less government, then you must have the other side of the coin, more responsibility. If you're going to say that that the government should not be looking after my mother and father, then you're going to say, I should be looking after my mother and father in their old age. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of old people out on the streets dying, and that's an untenable position. And then you'd be falling right back into the hands of those who espouse more government and more control.
Reviewing Larry's first term, Senator Barry Goldwater said, Dr. McDonald had contributed more to the Congress than any other freshman who has ever come here. Congressman McDonald's access to the congressional record, his articles in American Opinion and the Review of the News, and his frequent well-attended speeches nationwide at the invitation of the John Birch Society gave him the unique ability to bypass the liberal media. During his 9 years in Congress, Larry's rating on the 340 votes recorded by the Conservative Index of the Review of the News was 100%. By the time Larry McDonald was named chairman of the John Birch Society in mid-1983, he was the most widely respected anti-communist in the world. There wasn't the slightest doubt that as chairman of the John Birch Society, this man would be able to bring conservatives together as never before in the history of our movement. Indeed, in a July poll of a whole range of the American right by Richard Bigger's Conservative Digest, Larry McDonald was named overwhelmingly by respondents as the one man in America who best represented their personal philosophy. Larry McDonald understood and loved and was committed to our society and its purpose as few others have ever been.
Yes, you and all of us, through Mr. Welch's guidance and John Birch Society, have created a miracle today. By a continued effort with education as the first step, a necessary first step, and then Congress as the key, let's now complete that miracle. For less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. Thank you.
At this point, we get the chance to tell you someone very kindly thought to put a 10-minute break in your program. So you have a 10-minute break to go refresh yourselves, and we'll see you back.
Society's Leadership Conference and Council Dinner. We just went live on our Rumble channel. Okay, so turn around, wave to the camera, say hello to all the people in the room. Fantastic. Go to our Rumble account, Congress Society. And there we go. All right, if you could, welcome back again, and please give your attention to Tamara Scott. Thank you.
That was just so thoughtful. Thank you so very much. All right, so now I get to introduce our next speaker. James Patrick is an economist, an investigator, a film director originally from Washington, D.C. He's authored several books and directed the international documentary shot in 9 counties on the COVID saga, Planet Lockdown. It is available in 17 languages on planetlockdownfilm.com. He's now focusing on the struggle faced by the Dutch cattle farmers against their own government that is seeking to force buy out half of their land, consisting of 1/3 of the territory of Holland. Jane Patrick's expertise is in shining the light on the big picture of where we find ourselves today in a chaotic world gone wrong or gone mad. You can find his latest work on bigpicture.watch, where he produces full interviews with dignitaries around the world, as well as short and long format documentary films. His work equips people with the information to help our world stay free. Please welcome James Patrick.
You guys have already heard from me. Still too much time for Ryan here. But I wanted to briefly mention another piece I'm working on the fertility effects of the COVID vaccines, and another piece I did in 2020 in Kenya on fertility regulating vaccines. So when the whole COVID thing started going down, I started hearing about this Kenya case. And in October, went there for 2 weeks and shot a piece on these fertility regulating vaccines. This is a United Nations document from 1992 outlining these vaccines developed, and so there's been a big interest in having lower population, as everybody here knows. And there's this one lady was commenting on it, you were smiling, talking about all these horrible things. But there was so in the early 70s, the WHO developed what they called the first fertility regulating vaccines, and they basically took the basic science of a vaccine is you take a dead virus and an adjuvant, and it aggresses the immune system, and the body has an autoimmune response caused by the adjuvant, and then associates it with the dead virus, and then you create an autoimmune response against the virus, right? So in the early 70s, the WHO and the Rockefeller's Population Council and the National Institute of Immunology in India, in New Delhi, were all working on these kind of for vaccines that would inhibit fertility. And so they developed in the early 70s, WHO, what they call a fertility regulating vaccine, where they would take the tetanus shot and conjugate or bind the tetanus toxoid with beta-HCG, which is the most important hormone for a female pregnancy. So like the P birth control test is an ELISA test for HCG. And so basically the woman would have autoimmune response against tetanus and her own HCG hormone and not be able to maintain a pregnancy or lose a pregnancy. So there were accusations that these things, WHO is doing these tetanus campaigns and polio campaigns all the time around the world. And there were accusations in like half a dozen countries that like, hey, you guys are switching out some of the normal tetanus shots with fertility regulating tetanus shot versions, right? And but a lot of these are just accusations, not a lot of proof. But in Kenya, there was a really good case because in Kenya, half the medical clinics in the country are run by the Catholic Church. And so any big WHO campaign has to involve the Catholic Church. And some Kenyan Catholic doctors, this one guy, Dr. Karanja, he went to a conference I think in Houston, Texas, and met some Mexican medical doctors, and they said, hey, we tested we got suspicious of some WHO campaign in Mexico, we tested them, some tetanus vaccines. We found HCG in them. And then Karanja goes back home and there's in the middle of a tetanus campaign. And he got some nurses to pull some vials, tested them, and they had, like half of them had HCG. And so then he complained to the Catholic Bishops Association, they complained to the Catholic Bishops Association, complained to the Kenyan government. The Kenyan government agreed to form a joint commission of inquiry, and they commissioned higher quality, high performance liquid chromatography analyses of these vials, and about a little under half of them showed a positive for HCG. So I kind of heard about this case, not a lot of documentation on it, but I found this one article of the Karanja. This isn't a super professional article, but I got in touch with this academic and then had a Zoom call with these two doctors and was like, hey, I'd like to do a documentary. And so I flew down to Kenya and shot this film with Karanja and Wahome and the laboratory guy, and filmed the vials of anyway, long story short, later on, Karanja, I think it's possible he was murdered under the doctor, so I handed this footage to Children's Health Defense. They put out this film. I got Andy Wakefield to direct it, but I kept my name off it at the time. I was a little paranoid about that because Karanja got killed. So, but anyway, you can see here, the WHO tried to cover it up and they introduced more vials to increase the sample size. And this is the laboratory. Anyway. But anyway, so this led me, last time I was in France, and we're hearing lots of stories about women having fertility problems, or like obscure menstrual problems, hemorrhaging, double periods from the COVID shots. So this just got my interest in is there something more going on here? Being that, anyway, here you can just see here's some science papers. This Indian scientist Talwar has been very involved with creating these vaccines. There's a number of published studies of his work on doing fertility regulating vaccines. So so also they found in this joint commission took a look at also the polio vaccines and found estrogens in half of them, which Ryan was just telling me would also throw off a woman's pregnancy if there's a boosted level of estrogen. It will also feminize men and lower their sperm count. And then the Joint Commission said, hey, let's look at HPV shots. And then the whole thing was kind of covered up and wrapped up. So I've hired the same lab guy in Kenya to look at the HPV shots, and so far the two analyzed had HCG and estrogens in them, which is highly suspicious. So we're going to look at more vials and see what we find. But I think there's good evidence to say there's an active war crime type level activity with these WHO campaigns. Now, in the normal vaccines found in the medical stores, like medical supplies in Kenya, they didn't show a positive for anything. But in these WHO campaigns, these campaign operation-specific campaigns, there was this suspicious materials in them, and there was also other reasons in the case. They were giving the shots every 6 months. The normal tetanus shots aren't given that. They had armed guards around the vials. So if you're bringing things in for a campaign, it's a little more protected. You can bring the bad things in and bring them out without having the evidence laying around if you're committing a crime. But I just noticed there was a lot of similarities with the COVID vaccines because you had Gates and Gavi funding a lot of these vaccines. You had the Serum Institute of India was the manufacturer. They're the largest vaccine manufacturer. Gates has invested heavily in Serum Institute. They've manufactured several billion COVID shots in the world, and WHO is the main distributor and promoter of the COVID vaccines worldwide. So this sort of got my attention. It's like criminologically like a case that's similar. You know, you have the same perpetrators, the same actors at play that were guilty in the Kenyan case. So Also, so if these are just the novel flu virus vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccines, then why are there all these strange menstrual problems occurring? So I've been hearing lots of reports of women having 2 periods a month for 3 months or so after the COVID-19 vaccines. Also, one colleague noticed that depending on what day the woman took the shot in her menstrual cycle, it would have a different effect. So if it was like, I think in the first 15 days, first 14 days of the period, the period would disappear. It would not happen. If it was the second 14, it would be like a hemorrhage, which is similar to like an abortion medication. So anyway, I was in France last summer. I was like, okay, I'm not going to get, I did the Kenya piece, but I'm not going to stay involved with that this year. And then last summer I was in France and I heard there was this group called Where's My Period, or Où est mon cycle, and I got in touch with this woman, Melody, and I was thinking, okay, she's had she made an Instagram page and had thousands of testimonies of women having like egregious hemorrhaging, not a normal period, but really like heavy bleeding, you know. And so I got in touch with her and said, hey, could you get together a dozen women, and I'll film you guys. I'll be in and out in 3 hours, and I'll do a 30-minute piece on it, right? But then she couldn't find a lot of women, and then I made friends with her lawyer, and then I interviewed several stewardesses from Air France who took the shot and had problems, and then, anyway, it turned into this whole film, long story short. So now I'm doing another film on the fertility issues called Silent Infertility, and it's really going into Act 1 is sort of the testimonies of women in the U.S. and France, and then Act 2 is saying like, well, what, you know, and also Act 1 is like the gynecologist saying really unprecedented things, like why was the chief Association of Gynecologists, the American College of Obstetricians, recommending vaccinating pregnant women, you know, with an experimental vaccine. That was just really unprecedented and suspicious, you know, and then particularly with all the accounts coming out around the shots. And then Act 2, I go into the Kenya case and describe, you know, how there was issues with the the tetanus shots, the polio shots, and the HPV shots. And then these original analyses we're doing, finding continued problems in the HPV shots just as recently as the last few years in the HPV campaign there. And then the third act is sort of like, well, you know, if there is something suspicious going on, was the overall legal climate, like are there similarities between the Kenya case and the COVID case and the COVID vaccine case, and that like the COVID-19 vaccines were deployed by the military. They were actually not authorized by the FDA, they were authorized by the DoD as countermeasure prototype demonstrations. And I interviewed Brooke Jackson, who was one of who worked for a Pfizer subcontractor from Tavia, and the portion of the clinical trial she oversaw was she saw a lot of problems with the methodology, kind of some fraud in there, and so she was like, okay, what I saw would invalidate the portion I saw, and that would invalidate, that was enough of the overall clinical trials to invalidate the overall approval, so she sued the government for buying the shots because what she saw would invalidate enough of the trial to invalidate the approval. And then, so the first legal response Pfizer had was, well, they're not actually authorized by FDA, they're authorized by the DoD as countermeasure prototype demonstrations. So it's just this like very broad legal amorphous authorization. It's like, hey, we can just whip up anything and inject the people with it. And so it's just, and then there was a lot of military around the vials, guarding the vials, like in the United States, there's prohibitions, and in countries around the world, you're not allowed to analyze the vials. They kind of put some scary legal language to prevent people from looking at them, analyzing them. They'll say like, oh, it's property of the U.S. government, and it's property of the U.S. government until injected into the patient. And so to do anything else is a felony, i.e. to send it to a lab to be tested. And so it's just like, if this is just a normal, like novel flu vaccine, why structure it out of the DoD? Why have all these legal, you know, if you're doing shady stuff, that's a pretty slick legal packaging to put it under, because then, like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna write an angry letter to the DoD? You know, you're gonna go, my daughter got hurt, hey Pentagon, you know, you want to So anyway, so I just found that circumstantially there's a lot of shady stuff going on around the COVID vaccines, and I think it warrants investigations. I'd encourage people to get samples of HPV vaccines, COVID vaccines, get them analyzed. I don't know, maybe Ryan, you want to take a look at some more of those? But it's just, and that basically the first generation of these anti-fertility vaccine technologies are in the public record in the research literature. And so I think actually Ryan's in the film talking about some explanations of, according to what we know of the shots, how toxicity of the nanolipid particles and the spike could settle in the reproductive areas and cause inflammation, and that could be an explanation for why there's some fertility issues being reported, why there's hemorrhaging being reported. I mean, I'm even hearing reports of women who've already had years ago full hysterectomies who are experiencing bleeding, which would kind of mean that, which could mean that it's just causing inflammation or irritation in that area, and then bleeding's occurring. So whatever's going on, it's just not good, you know, and potentially very, very criminal. So I would just, as an investigator, I would really encourage people to get samples, encourage people to pull samples, have a proper chain of custody, send them to Ryan. I'm trying to get her in trouble. No, but anyway, I mean, you're welcome to contact me. I'd find someone who can analyze it. But anyway, I have cards if anyone is willing to put their knife out there. So, but I'll just show you the 2-minute trailer of an early version of the trailer of the fertility film, and then without further ado, Ryan can do this.
I get vaccinated last year, and then I had menstrual trouble, a lot of bleeding, and when I was talking with my doctor, she doesn't really had no answer. She was just not listening. When I started the Instagram account, a lot of testimonies came. Instagram account went to be bigger and bigger. It was very quick. And I had, I think, 4,500 testimonies in 4 months. And then I went to the French Senate with my lawyer, Diane Plota.
We have put into line the problem that suffer lots of women. This is something that is natural when we have a contract, you're liable for what you sell. In this contract that we have with the European Union, well, this liability doesn't exist. As a European citizen, we have a right to transparency. What we are facing today in France is the assumption by our government and by our national health agencies that this product works. We know it's a lie.
At first, you are afraid because your body is not working, and so you're saying, what is happening? What is wrong with me? Miscarriage, adenomia, early menopause, endometriosis, amenorrhea, menorrhagia. A lot are bleeding all the time, but a lot are not bleeding at all.
The doctors say, oh, well, your period will not come back, you are menopause. When women have developed heavy bleedings after vaccination, they give to them this medication, Exacil, but it doesn't work anymore. And the only solution that the doctors give them is to go for hysterectomy. We have to break this silent wall. We have to stop this, we have to find a solution, we have to know what is happening to the woman.
I have 2 young daughters, and I don't want to let them in that kind of world. So if they can't have baby anymore, what are we going to do?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I MC a lot of dinners. I'm honored to MC this one, and I don't know the last one that I sat and took notes on a speaker. This is so informative. Like every time I interview somebody on the show, which Lisa, thank you for mentioning, it is every noon, Monday through Friday on Lindell TV. Central Time, love to have you follow along if you can join us live. But I take notes. It's my classroom. I'm learning along with you when I interview the great folks from JBS. So thank you guys for everything you do. Now I get to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Ryan Cole is the founder, CEO, and medical director of Cole Diagnostics, an independent anatomic and clinical laboratory that served patients of Idaho and across the nation for nearly 20 years with expert pathology diagnosis and laboratory testing. He has helped perform and diagnose over 150,000 COVID tests during the pandemic and has diagnosed over 500,000 patients in his career. Dr. Cole completed his residency in the anatomic and clinical pathology at Mayo Clinic, where he was chief fellow during his surgical pathology fellowship, followed by a year as chief fellow at the Ackerman Academic of Dermatopathology. I practiced that word. I practiced that word. Say it with me, friends. Dermatopathology. Right, there's a rhythm to it. In New York, under the direction of the world-renowned dermatopathologist. It's a good thing I don't drink. Under the late A. Bernard Ackerman. He has spoken in the U.S. Senate and multiple state legislatures, as well as numerous international conferences, sharing the science and truth about COVID, treatments and vaccination, and medical freedom. Cole Diagnostics now serves as a consultation practice to help answer pressing questions and related to the long-term effects of COVID and vaccination. When not focused on science, he enjoys working with his family on his 21-acre organic farm, tending to his lambs, cattle, ducks, and chickens, and sculpting his 250-tree fruit orchard, sawmilling local urban timber, and building one-of-a-kind pieces of furniture, guitars, wood boats, and other functional wood art. Wow. Good job, parents somewhere. Please help me welcome Dr. Ryan Cole.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. John Birch Society, my scout leader was a John Birch Society member, so I learned about John Birch Society at a very young age. If any of you know the Benson family, I was friends with Benson's grandson, and he talked about the John Birch Society quite often. And my wife, her high school friend was grandson of Cleon Skousen, for any of you who have read any of his books. So a little connection going on a little ways back, at least 40 years. I'm just going to dive right in here. And I'm a Mac guy, so hopefully we get this right. Okay, good. I always start my talks with this quote by Mark Twain: "The man who does not read has no advantage over the man who cannot read." Why do we find ourselves having problems in modern medicine in this day and age? Well, I think this is part of it. And what's part of our societal problem? Well, we have the TikTok 30-second generation. And that's another part of it. And as Patton said, if everybody is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. So I'm glad that this is an independent-minded group of people that is willing to think outside that box. I just say box, what box? Is there a box? Do I have to think inside the box? No. And there's no justification for taking away individual freedom in the guise of public safety. And what have we done for 3 years? And what did we as a society and a world allow to happen in the guise of public safety? And if you give the powers that be a report card, what grade do they get? If they were anything less than an F, I'd give them that. My friend Bobby Kennedy Jr. said, "A free democracy requires that we love our freedom more than we fear a virus." Very simple. Very simple. And I would encourage you to listen to Bobby as much as possible. He's making the rounds on the private social medias because the mainstream media is too afraid of him. And he has some fantastic ideas. And of course, all doctors and scientists agree Or you censor the ones who don't? And it's easy in life. To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. So who's a pathologist? Okay, I'm a pathologist. You know, some of you think Quincy back in the day. No, I don't do the crime scene and all the autopsies. I do the biopsies, mostly of the living. Now I do review a lot of post-vaccine death autopsies as well. Now, why does it matter? Well, pathologists, we're the quality control of medicine. If something goes wrong, we see it first. So if something is new as a disease entity in society, we raise the red flag and say, we're seeing a pattern here. So we're pattern observers, we're synthesizers. We look at the big picture, we look at the cells, and we put all the puzzle pieces together and then come up with an answer. So it's critically important when the pathologists see something, that we say something. You hear that in the airport, you see something, say something, you see something, say something. And guess what? I said something. And guess what? Google me now, and I'm one of the worst doctors on the planet because I value my freedom of speech and freedom of observation. That's what science is. So anyway, other pathologists are observing what I pointed out. Those of you who don't know me, you can find me. I'll share my website at the end. And clinicians are starting to see the same things that I've been pointing out as well. Integrity is very important, especially integrity in science. We seem to have lost that. And integrity is very simple. In life, not just science. It's the distance between our lips and our actions. We took an oath in medicine to primo non nocere. First, do no harm. What has modern medicine done to society? We simply ask the question as pathologists, we do the science, and we don't fear the repercussions. I've had plenty of repercussions. Would I do all of this all over again? Of course I would, because the truth is the truth no matter what. A lot of people come up and say, well, you're so courageous. My courage is simple. It's simply knowing the truth and saying the truth. That's what it is. And a lot of people come up to me and say, well, gosh, I wish that, thanks for doing what you're doing and saying what you're saying. I wish I could do that too. And I look at them and say, you can't. Well, I would lose my job. Well, I did. But the truth is the truth. And if you're going to set an example for the next generation and the next generation, you have to stand in the truth. And it's very simple. James brought up a great question about these files. What's in these files? What's going on? It's very easy. You can't find what you don't look for. You're not looking, you're not going to find it. So I see a lot of wide awake faces and open eyes. It's a crowd that looks. And we should. And as a pathologist, I look at millions upon millions of cells every week. And the cells don't lie. You can have a political opinion. You can have, your societal opinions. You can pretend an X is a Y chromosome and a Y is an X chromosome. No, I won't get into that argument. I could. I won't, because the science is science and the cells don't lie. What's trust? Very simple. It's the truth plus transparency. And we've lacked that in society. Now keep in mind that Orwell was not an instruction manual. It was a warning. It was meant to be a warning, not an instruction manual. All right, by show of hands, Trusted News Initiative. Who is aware of the Trusted News Initiative in this room? Please raise your hand. Okay. Homework assignment for everybody. Look this up. This is why you haven't been hearing what the people on the front line that are physicians and providers have been trying to share. And I'll show you really quickly. Trusted News, formed by the BBC, and you can see EBU, AFP, Meta, Twitter back in the day. I think Elon's changed that. AP, Reuters, CBC, Google, YouTube, First Draft. They got together in 2019 to control the narrative on election integrity. Well, then along came COVID, and then they self-proclaimed themselves the COVID czars. Trusted News Initiative to combat spread of harmful vaccine disinformation and announce a major research project. TNI announces plans to tackle harmful coronavirus disinformation. Blah, 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 blah. So they got together, included with the federal government, the Biden White House, and others. And in conclusion, they said, your choices are lockdown, mask, shock, fear, and we will define what misdis and malinformation is. And then they formed a group of the government, which thankfully was disbanded, but is now being formed in other small groups, of a malinformation branch of the government to go after information. I just say there's information. Let the best information rise to the top. Simple as that. But we live in a time when intelligent people are being silent so that stupid people won't be offended. I like this one. Here's your near future game show. I'm sorry, Arthur, your answer was actually correct, but Paul shouted his opinion louder, so he gets that point. And an extra bonus point also goes to Sue, as she was offended by your answer. Now, I've been watching, I like to binge shows every now and then. We turned on the TV last night, my wife and I. She's my better teether, she's here supporting me. And I realized how stupid TV really is. I haven't watched it for years. And so usually I'll binge something or other. I've been binging Isaac Asimov's Foundation. And it's been interesting, but there's this quote in it that was so profound. So I had to throw it in my talk and share this. So Gal, she's Dr. Gal Dornick, she's one of the characters, a doctor in the show, and this is futuristic. She says, ask a historian, what was mankind's greatest invention? Fire? The wheel, the sword? I would argue it's history itself. History isn't fact, it's narrative, one carefully curated and shaped. Under the pen strokes of the right scribe, a villain becomes a hero, a lie becomes the truth. What we choose to tell our children and what we censor, what we illuminate and what we gloss over. History as an act of addition and subtraction. A people without history is like a tree without roots. What's missing from the wise man's history? When did story replace record? When all the facts fall short of believability, fantasy feels reassuringly solid. And since this is my history, I get to decide which parts have been subtracted, which have been added. History is the ultimate weapon. Because it harnesses time itself. Used correctly, the past can alter the present. What other invention can do that? And so I would add that, and just like that, little Susie cured the worst virus of all. Know where your information is coming from, and who is altering the history, who's controlling the narrative, why are they controlling the narrative? Let's look at where we were over the last couple of years. Yeah, sure, there was a virus, SARS-CoV-2. Novel? No, 76% similar to SARS-CoV-1 from the early 2000s. Here's where we were. This was at a rally in Maui a couple of years ago. This little 4-year-old with her sign, fear is the real pandemic. That said it all. Everybody was afraid. We all found ourselves this social status in an isolationship. And let's not forget what the most precious item was that we all wanted. Stock up, folks. They're trying to do it again. And then social distancing seemed rather awkward. But the lie. They started with the lie. There's no treatment. Go home till your lips turn blue. Everybody be afraid. And of course, the drugs that shall not be named became anathema. And that trusted news initiative silenced any information sharing on these fantastically antiviral medications. How many lives were lost because these drugs weren't used? Millions around the world. Millions. The lie. None of us is safe until all of us are safe. Nonsense. Oh, we must wait for a vaccine. Nonsense. And then what about this lie? The government, the CDC, I call them the Centers for Deception and Confusion, they changed their definition mid-game. And they said, oh, we'll define when you're vaccinated and when you're not. And so let's take the before 21 definition, a product that produces immunity to a specific disease, protecting the person from that disease, and produces immunity. And then to slip in their new technology, I guess we better change the definition to a preparation that stimulates the body immune response against disease and produces protection. Well, if it stimulates an immune response, just like the dirt. I mean, it does about the same thing. Okay, am I here to judge you? No. Now, if you got one shot, don't get two. If you got two, don't get three. If you got three, don't get four. If you never got one, please never get one. Easy as that. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to share some science. For whatever reason people did or didn't, I'm not here to judge. But the vaccines didn't work. They were bad therapy at best, which now their effectiveness is negative. It's not a vaccine. It's below FDA, EUA required efficacy. And you're hearing from the White House now. I'll get to that in a second. It doesn't prevent disease, doesn't prevent acquisition, doesn't prevent you from transmitting the disease, doesn't prevent the disease, and it should no change in all-cause mortality or death. In fact, after the rollouts of the shots, all-cause mortality will fall. So ask your doctor if a drug with 1,291 side effects listed on 32 pages, including blood clots, strokes, and heart attacks, is right for you. Safe and effective? Well, yes, I can see the test results here. The vaccine is safe and effective. And of course, we learned in the last couple of years, we knew the speed of sound, we knew the speed of light, and here it's very easy to see what the speed of science is. Let me hit this real quick. This is what I was going to talk about at the White House. So the shots that rolled out, by the time the Wuhan shot rolled out, Delta was upon us. By the time they came out with boosters for BA4 and BA5, those variants which still have the Wuhan, all three of those were extinct. So they're pushing extinct boosters for viruses that didn't exist, for variants that didn't exist. The dominant variant this summer was XB115 and BA286, which they designed this autumn's shot for, which are now almost statistically extinct. So now the White House, everybody needs a booster for something that's expired for a variant that's extinct. Put that in your pipe and smoke on it. That's the insanity, that's the propaganda, that's the lie. That's the lie. Now, do I have a background in immunology? Oh, yes, I do. I did PhD work in immunology. Do I have a background in virology? Oh, yes, I do. I did PhD work in virology. Do I have a background in microbiology and pathology? Yes, I do. This is my expertise. So when some Nimrod dimwit from some government agency gets up in front of you and says, do this for your health, they are lying. So chasing the coronavirus with the vaccine is like playing whack-a-mole at the arcades. So it's as effective as trying to pick a booger through a mask. I appreciate Tony posing for this one. Thank you very much, Tony. Now, HIV also has a spike protein. It's a different spike protein, but it also mutates. Coronaviruses always mutate. And they always mutate ahead of our efforts. So Tony's holy grail, before we finally got him to retire and hopefully put him behind bars, Tony was trying to, his holy grail was an HIV vaccine. Ask Tony why 40 years later we still don't have an HIV vaccine. Because it always mutated, just like coronaviruses do. So here we were for years, trying to do this, and we'll never catch it, folks. That dog is energetic and trying, but it's not the right approach. Science gone rogue. So scientists have discovered that people will believe anything when you say scientists have discovered it. And here's science gone rogue. Taking a gene and telling you it's a vaccine, injecting it into your body and saying it's a vaccine. It is a gene product. It is an injectable gene product. And they put it into your body with a lipid nanoparticle that's highly toxic, and then your body is supposed to tolerate that. And then it turns your cells into a spike protein factory. Your cells are human cells that are meant to make human proteins. Your cells are not pathogenic cells meant to make pathogenic proteins. When your cells make them, your cells are attacked by your own immune system. And of course they said, oh, we'll just put it in your arm and it'll stay in your arm. But guess what? In your arm you have blood vessels. Those are little pipes under pressure. And you put a little lipid nanoparticle that floats in blood and it goes everywhere. And here are your muscle cells, all those brown dots, that's your cells making spike protein. These are from my late great colleague and friend Dr. Burkhardt, who recently passed in Germany, a phenomenal pathologist. And then what happens in your body? Well, these little curves that you can't see from where you're sitting, these are the first 48 hours of where in the body, we had to FOIA this information, this came from Japan. And we find out what cells in your body all of a sudden are making spike protein. And I'll be darned if it's not in the plasma, it's in the liver, it's in the bone marrow. And see that little lower yellow curve, it's going upwards. They stopped this study at 48 hours. But what's that one that's going up really, 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 really rapidly and tall, but they the study on? Oh, that's the ovaries. And did they treat this as a vaccine or as a gene-based product or as a pharmaceutical agent or agencies? No. Did they study where it went in the body, like that graph I showed you? No. Did they look at the toxicology? No. Did they do fertility and reproductive studies? No. Did they do mutation studies for cancer risk? No. Did they do dose dependency? Some people get this gene and all of a sudden they're a spike factory. Some people get it, your body clears it, and you make nothing. But we don't know who. And did they have any long-term safety studies? No. And then they tell you it's a vaccine, and then you see these articles. mRNA-loaded lipid nanoparticles reprogram cells and edit genes. Oh, really? This was from this month. Or this, delivery of mRNAs to specific organs by lipid nanoparticles for gene therapy. Trust in public health? No, the system's broken. Public health should not be about treatment. It should be about education and prevention. It's their job to educate. And we took that oath in medicine to first do no harm. And we breached foundational principles. This was in Denmark last week where I was giving a lecture. This is my pathology colleague, Dr. Claire Craig. What did we breach? First do no harm, we breached that. The precautionary principle to not expose healthy people to unnecessary risk, like pregnant women and children. And adults have a duty to protect children. Children do not have a duty to protect adults. Grandma should protect the 2-year-old, the 2-year-old doesn't protect grandma. Informed consent, out the window. Bodily autonomy, out the window. I love this quote. The FDA protects the big drug companies and is subsequently rewarded in using the government's police powers. They attack those who threaten the big drug companies. People think that the FDA is protecting them. It isn't. What the FDA is doing and what the public thinks it is doing are as different as night and day. That was a quote from Dr. Herbert Lay, former commissioner of the US FDA in 1969. This is not the first rodeo, folks. They've been doing this a long time. Follow the money, the revolving door. NIH patents, research, licenses technology, discoveries go to commercial enterprises for drug development. Between 1991 and 2019, the NIH received over $2 billion in royalties from 34 different drugs. They received over $400 million from Moderna because the NIH owns the patent on the spike protein in the sequence. And then your government mandated something that they own. How about that? And then the FDA, they evaluate safety and efficacy of drugs prior to marketing, and they receive up to 75% of their funding from the pharmaceutical industry. Regulators are captured, purchased, and bought. The FDA review does not compare the new drug to the other better treatment options available. 9 of the last 10 FDA commissioners have gone on to work for pharma. Just in case you wonder if they're looking out for you. And let's see, the EMA in Europe, 89% of their regulatory funding comes from pharma. TGA in Australia, 96%. US FDA, 56 to 75%, depending on the data you look at. MHRA in the UK, 86%. Japan, 85%. Health Canada, 50%. That's the fox guard in the hen house, folks. If you think what they're teaching you from the pulpits of these 3-letter agencies, it's not about your health. And so it's very simple to see. Here's the evolution of medicine. And pharma, if you take the P out, it's pharma, so just keep that in mind. Here's their stronghold on medicine. Again, keep following the money. Advertising in major medical journals, where does it come from? They influence what gets published. So your doctor, when some rep comes along in some short skirt or some muscly dude to the female doctor, they're like, hey, buy our new product. Here's the skinny on it. And they read it real quickly and say, oh, better drug. Okay, we better start prescribing this. And then they publish the guidelines for using these medicines. Who does? The ghostwriters are the pharmaceutical industries in the Lancet, the JAMA, the New England Journal of Medicine. It's not about medicine. It's about corporate capture. And then the incentives benefit the system, not the patient, not you. I took an oath to you. Not to an administrator, not to a pharmaceutical company, not to a government agency. I took an oath to a patient. But what's wrong? Most doctors are employed by a big system now. Thanks, ACA. Thanks, Obamacare. Care is dictated by what the system says. that they can do, and what the insurance company says will be paid. Anybody see something wrong with this picture? A little bit, maybe? I do. And then following the guidelines reduces their risk exposure so you don't get sued. So everybody treats the guidelines as a law instead of treating the patient in front of them. And then fewer providers spend time to research treatments independently because they're just looking for the administrator to tell them what to do. Why did everybody beg for treatments for their loved ones in the hospital that were being killed by Fauci's NIH protocols and the drug remdesivir, which is a kidney toxic drug, remdesivir is what I call it. But why? Because they were incentivized by the federal government that if you do what we say, then we can do this mass experiment and study on humanity with the drugs that we're making billions off of as the government. And if you follow what we do, you're covered, you're indemnified. But those who question are accused of not following the science. I don't mean to be so dreary. Hopefully I have some more funnies in here. But then we're stuck in information silos. We become an echo chamber. I mean, a lot of us are like-minded in this room. I know there are a lot of independent thinkers, but we're all prone to confirmation bias. We want to believe what we want to believe, and we think what we think, and then it's hard to change our minds. And then I showed you what the targeted media does, and then they just reinforce what we already believe. Well, I heard this, I heard this. Did you independently read and study it, or are you illiterate like Mark Twain said? And the studies are more likely to be published if they agree with the perspective of the editors and the journals and the pharmaceutical companies. And then the mainstream media spins and spins and spins and tells their stories. And then, you know, Anderson Cooper, sponsored by Pharma, sponsored by Pfizer. I'm watching the US Open last night. Moderna. Mode RNA, Moderna. And they're trying to get a gene in your body. So they make a lot of money. And they don't care about your health. And James was right. What the heck is in these vials? I've done plenty of shows on that. I'm not going to do that tonight. And then they censor the inconvenient findings. I'm going to skip the corporate tactics. Dr. Corey has a great talk on that. And then scientific inquiry is critically important. Science requires constantly questioning. And what we know today will be obsolete years to come. Medicine advances when the previous generation dies, basically. Which is kind of sad, but it's true, because we become dogmatic in what we do. Open scientific discovery and debate allow the best ideas to flourish and rise to the top. There's no such thing as mis, dis, or malinformation. There is information. Let it have an open discourse and dialogue and battle. And you will know by the end. If somebody's hiding something from you, then they're probably lying to you. Let there be transparency. That's truth plus transparency. That's how we gain trust. And if the questioners are silent, scientific inquiry stops, and we're in the dark ages. And if you can question it, it's science. And if you cannot question it, it's propaganda. And here we are asking our question in today's modern era. This is what has happened to many of my colleagues. And then, what about the lies? Well, Rochelle Walensky, of course we were hiding the data from the American people. Of course we were. It wasn't ready, the information wasn't ready for prime time. The people don't deserve it. Then they didn't monitor the adverse event reporting system for the vaccines. Oh, well, why would we do that? That's our job. As the Centers for Deception and Confusion. And then, oh, what about this gal, Scarf Lady, in the White House? Everybody remembers Scarf Lady. She stands there looking all grandmotherly and happy and says a few words or two. And then she writes a tell-all book. Now, keep in mind, she looks all sweet and everything. She was an intelligence operative for years for the government. So, she plays the game. So everybody gets mad at Fauci. This is who you should really be mad at. This is the deeper story. In December 2015, 2020, she told ABC, this is one of the most highly effective vaccines we have in our infectious disease arsenal. In July 22, oh, I knew these vaccines were not going to protect against infection. I think we overplayed the vaccines. Really, folks? And then Fauci, natural infection is the mother of all vaccines. Of course, they told us, no, if you had the infection, you still had to get a shot. He lied. He was talking about the flu virus in 2018. So he's just, he's a carnival barker at best. But in 2018, he knew natural infection was better than any vaccine we had for any condition. And public health, Did you hear this? Vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D? No, you didn't from public health. What about lose weight? Cut out your sugar, eliminate high fructose corn syrup? What about seed oils? How many people know about one of the worst things you can be eating is canola oil, soybean oil? Sorry, I know I'm from the Midwest, guys. Lived here for a long time. Soybean oil, cottonseed oil, corn oil, blah, blah, blah. They inflame your body. They're bad for you. If you can't press it, get oil out of it, and you have to put it through an industrial process, it is not oil. It's an industrial byproduct. What about exercise? Getting your sleep, praying, meditating. Good for your immune system. Going outside, getting sunshine, being in nature. There's something in Japan called forest bathing that activates your T cells to be out in the forest. It literally does. Science, real science. Be in community like this. And have early treatment on hand. Be prepared, be a good Boy Scout. Or at least back in the day before the Boy Scout didn't grow up. So, here we are, folks. Here's your war on COVID. You are here. Which, of course, we thought we weren't until the last couple of weeks. And the new variant is out. Got to scare everybody with the new variant. And then, of course, the Cochrane mask study. Cochrane is one of the biggest scientific research companies. They take lots of studies, put them all together in big meta studies, and analyze them. Masks never worked. Masks never will work. Masks didn't work. Never put a mask on your face in the future. They don't block viruses. But intelligence must be destroyed, and every intelligent person knows that viruses are afraid of restaurant tables. Easy as that. Very simple. Very simple. Just sit down and have a meal. You'll never get sick. And then we did things like this. Right? I mean, that's what's fun, is to hear the laughter when I share these things now, because we can see the ridiculousness of what we've gone through. The noble lie. Oh, we're here to protect you and keep you safe. Hogwash. Oh, but what about this? Can you imagine? No. And this. And of course, sunshine kills viruses. I live in Idaho. It's cold in winter. You guys live in Iowa. It's cold in winter. Just put that on and go dance outside like Dancing with the Stars. Put one on, and you'll know that it never worked. And so we find that people are slowly beginning to realize that wearing this protected a lot more than wearing this. You can have that slide later, I promise. You know, where did the virus come in? Through the eyes, the mouth, the nose. Where do we develop immunity? The eyes, the mouth, the nose. Where do they give people a shot? In the arm. And your body, yeah, right? We have different antibodies in this area than we do here. This one's IgG and IgM quickly than IgG. But you don't form mucosal IgA, which is little brooms that mop up infectious agents. I'm going to skip over a couple of these real quick. Okay, so you're in the northern hemisphere.
Larry McDonald.
Is that Larry? We found him. Now, in the northern hemisphere, above the 35 degrees latitude, you cannot synthesize vitamin D from about October through March. We're getting into the season, folks, where if you're not taking vitamin D on a daily basis, you will be immune suppressed for the winter. No such thing as flu and cold season, I like to say hyperbolically. Only low vitamin D season. How many of your doctors share that with you now? Yeah, no. Because why? How much money does it make for big pharma? Nothing. So I need that vitamin D. Get out there, folks. Get your vitamin D. And study after study after study after they attacked us for saying, oh, vitamin D, and one of the local hospital chairs for vitamin D. Okay, he's an intellectual Lilliputian, but I won't go into that. But all the studies now retrospectively show that vitamin D was so critical in COVID outcomes. And who are the high-risk populations? The older you are, higher risk. Care homes, especially. Where was the death? Care homes. Darker skin. Darker your skin, the more vitamin D and more sunshine you need. Obesity sequesters your vitamin D. Lose that weight if you can. I lost 46 pounds 14 years ago. You can ask me about that later. People in northern climates, that would be us right now. High fructose corn syrup, it's a poison. It's a poison. It is a poison. It's an industrial corn byproduct, but it's a poison. It inactivates your vitamin D. And what was the worst outcome for COVID the last 3 years? Your blood sugar. What's the best medicine Best medicine of all. Any idea? The tip of your fork. Exercise, what about exercise? Okay, pre-isolation day 1 will look like this, isolation day 30, you should have been out like that. Get out there and move your bodies, folks. Now, I was just in Denmark by Viking ancestors. I'm not saying you have to have six-pack abs and look like these Vikings, but you can get out and move your body a little bit. And studies in the UK, 400,000 patient cohorts, 40,000 patient cohorts, those that move their body did better. Simple as that. Adiposity, obesity, metabolic unwellness, insulin resistance, and poor blood sugar for any condition is what's going to make your immune system not function properly. It's doable, folks. Be your own best doctor. Don't rely on somebody in a white coat. I think white coat should be like NASCAR, where you have to wear your sponsors on your white coat. Just saying, it's just an idea. I think it should be required in every academic medical institution, every hospital. So this is my farm, a little bit of my farm, my cows, my sheep. If it doesn't look like food, if you can't read what the ingredient says, don't eat it. Eat what comes from the earth, folks. That's how we were, Hippocrates said, let thy food be thy medicine, let thy medicine be thy food, 3,000 years ago. It's as easy as that. And here's how we eat in society. Unfortunately, don't get me wrong, indulgence every now and then is tasty and fun. But if you have this fine sports car on the left, would you put sand in your tank? Of course you wouldn't, because eventually it's going to look like the jalopy. And here's the question I have, okay, we've got this big push for organic in our society, more organic the better. Everybody's going to dig, I read all the food labels, man, my body's so pure. And like I connect to Mother Earth and I feel so grounded. But let me stick some of that synthetic mRNA juice into my arm. It makes no sense. I mean, we've just gone mad. Well, real quick, I'm a pathologist. I'm not going to turn you into a pathologist in the next 15 minutes, but I'm going to show you where that spike protein goes. It is a toxin we picked through these gain-of-function studies and the gene editing and everything that went on in Wuhan and North Carolina. We want to blame China. We really need to blame America. We need to blame North Carolina and Harvard and some of our DOD and our government agencies that were working on gain-of-function studies, and then hid the gain-of-function studies over in China. So the harms. The spike protein is the toxic part of the virus, so they gave everybody a gene that makes what? The spike protein. Where does the spike protein go? Well, the spike protein goes to the nerves. Here's a study from my colleague Dr. Moser in Germany. All those brown dots, that's spike protein in brain tissue and brain vessels. This is from my colleague Dr. Burkhardt. That is spike protein in the brain. Anybody hear a brain fog with COVID? How about with the shots? Yes. Why? Spike protein crosses that blood-brain barrier. Here's one from my laboratory. See all those Swiss cheese holes? That's mad cow disease in a 34-year-old from Australia after his third shot. Here's another one, same patient, all brown dots for spike protein. Peripheral nerves, people get tingling and burning in the nerves. See all that pink in this study? That's spike protein in the peripheral nerves. What about organ damage? Okay, I don't need the church organ, folks. That spike protein, I showed you those distribution studies. First place it goes is to the liver. It starts replicating within hours, making spike protein there. Autoimmunity, this is the highest thing on the increase right now. Rasmussen or something, I always forget which poll. Out of 100 Americans, 15 Americans have a new chronic illness. Oh, is my mic down in there, Trent? Okay, not bad. I can go in slow motion while you change your hand. Anyway, autoimmune disease, it's on the increase as well. 15 out of 100 Americans have a new chronic condition after the shots. Good news, 85% don't. But 15% of millions of people is a lot of people. So that's something to consider as well. Why? Because the lipid nanoparticle literally was designed to go everywhere in the body. And it did, and it does. And this is why you're not going to get another booster. But you're also never going to get a lipid nanoparticle shot plus another gene pathogen. Why? Because it will go everywhere in your body, and you have human cells, and they're meant to make human proteins. So they want RSV shots to be mRNA lipid nanoparticles, flu shots to be mRNA lipid nanoparticles. If you're a doctor that says this is a good idea, it is time to fire your doctor. Does it go to the heart? Well, on the left is healthy heart. On the right, all those blue dots, that's myocarditis that you hear about on the news. That's inflammatory cells destroying the heart muscle cells. And here we can see on the left, that spike protein in those heart cells. And on the right, we test for virus to make sure it's not caused from virus, things caused from the vaccine, and it is. And so unfortunately, here we need to quit playing games with my heart, the Vax Street boys. Here we have Bill and Tony and Klaus and Soros. We've got the whole crew there. They're playing with your heart, folks, and the next generations. Check for myocarditis, you should be. So the clot thickens. Yeah, so what else does the spike protein do? Well, sorry you just ate, but I'm going to show this anyway. That's not spaghetti, folks. These are thick fibrous clots induced by the spike protein. Thankfully, some people survive these clots, like this internist and this pilot pulled from their pulmonary arterial trees. And we know the makeup of these now. That spike protein causes other proteins in your body to clump and gel. Now, is that happening in everybody? No. But it's happening at a higher rate than it should be. And so here we have Sergeant Pfizer's Lonely Heart Clot Band. And you see a lot of media figures and prominent athletes and whatnot that have passed in the last couple of years. I wonder why. And it all started happening strangely in 2021. I don't know. It goes to the adrenal glands. So James brought up the point, okay, now we know it goes to the brain, it also goes to your adrenals. Put that together in a second for you here. It's critically important for your blood pressure, for your cortisol response, but also for your hormones. Okay, puzzle pieces falling together. Here it is in the adrenal gland, spike protein, like I said, everywhere. It also weakens the immune system and allows other viruses to reactivate. If you're chronically fatigued after COVID or after the shots, check yourself for mononucleosis. Epstein-Barr virus reactivated. On the rise, human papillomavirus, herpes viruses, shingles, huge shingles outbreaks after these shots. Why? Immune suppression. Immune suppression, and that's going to become important in a second here. But did the scientists tell us this? No, safe and effective. Get your shot. Do the right thing. Save grandma. What about you? What about your bodily autonomy? What about your individual freedom? It alters your immune response. We knew this early on, this study out of the Netherlands, Dr. Fossel. And then it also blinds your immune system. If you keep getting exposed to the same protein over and over, your body eventually says, I'm going to imprint on that and eventually tolerate it. Immune tolerance, IgG4. You hear about, antibodies. I say antibodies from antibodies. It's a lie. It's a surrogate marker that medicine uses to fool you into taking something because they can detect an antibody. There are good antibodies and bad antibodies, folks. And if you have the wrong antibody, it can be your enemy. Now, Bill and I were just talking, I'm a beekeeper on the farm. Got stung the other day. Did it hurt? Sure. Did it itch for a little bit? Sure. Did I swell and die from it? No. Why? Because the more I'm exposed to that bee venom, the more my body becomes tolerant of it. That's what we want. Great idea for allergens. Horrible idea for pathogens. Because eventually along comes a new variant of a pathogen. Your body can't recognize it at all because it is tolerant of certain proteins on that pathogen. It says we're not even going to mount an immune response. Then that pathogen can take over your body. Game over. Really fast. Oh, what about reproductive alterations? Let's look at the Handmaid's Tale. This is the placenta. This is word from Dr. Burkhart. See all those brown dots? That is spike protein in the placenta. answering Jane's question about the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, a FOIA request was done. They received $11 million from the government to push the shots on pregnant women. $11 million. Our own government to test on its own pregnant women and the next generation of children. Our own government pushed it. And the pawns in these agencies and these boards of medicine just sat out with their catcher's mitt. Yes, sir, yes, ma'am, whatever you say, we'll do it. First, do no harm. I showed you the evolution of medicine. Well, it's not just that. Qu'est-ce mon cycle? Where's my cycle? Well, here's the endometrium. See all the round dots? That's the endometrium. That's spike protein in the uterus. Why are these women bleeding? It's in the brain, it's in the adrenal glands, it's in the gonads. That's a feedback loop. It is altering that feedback loop in a really bad way. In Europe, depending on the country, the birth rates are down 10 to 20% in each European nation. What about men? So this deceased young man, after his shots, see every brown dot? This is testes. Every brown dot in there is spike protein in the sperm. This elderly gentleman, every brown dot in there, that's spike protein in the sperm. So what about the next generation? I don't know. But this I do know, that unvaxxed sperm is the next Bitcoin. So just keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about we're going to talk about the monster in the room here, cancer. Now, I got in trouble for telling the truth and observing. What did I observe after the rollout of the shots? Viral outbreaks. Why? Immune suppression. Viral outbreaks of shingles, molluscum, other viruses. I'm like, oh dear, What did I see after that? Uterine cancers. 5 times the rate I used to see them. 5 times. And then doctors around the world, okay, I've traveled 400,000 miles in the last 2 years, spoken in 15 nations, half the states. Everywhere I go, doctors come up to me, thank you for speaking out, I'm seeing it, I'm seeing it, I'm seeing it. And they're seeing the cancer increase. Dr. DeCleach in England, we gotta stop this. He's seeing the state of cancers progress after the boosters. If you're comfortable, I asked this in the European Parliament a couple months ago when I was testifying there. I showed hands after the rollout of the shots. Who knows someone, is close to someone, has a family member, friend, or self that had cancer or a reactivated cancer after the rollout of the shots in 21? That's about 15%. In the European Parliament, it was 40%.
I went to her funeral.
I'm sorry.
Pancreatic cancer.
Pancreatic, that's one that's on the increase.
She was a nurse.
I'm so sorry. Hey, here you can see in 21, something happened. This is from the ethicalskeptic.com. See that trend line? Mid-21, where does it kick up? Mid-21, what happened in mid-21? I wonder. What about lymphoid cancers? Mid-21, where did that line start going up? Mid-21. And that one's a 9 sigma event. This one's a 7 sigma run, and some of this data is old already. But what happened in mid-21 all around the world? This is a 12-fold increase, and you have to keep in mind there's a lag rate in cancer. And then even our own American Cancer Society, we're seeing an 11.5% increase in cancer above excess expected. And then my friend Ed Dowd in Hawaii, financetechnologies.com, here's the problem. Government works for us, right? We don't work for them. And we pay them taxes to keep all this data and run the HHS, the CDC, NIH, FDA, blah, 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 blah. They have all this data. And this is our data. This is Americans' data. And we need the data. So we could go in by every age group, every 10 years, and figure out what the cancer rates are. And we can also figure out who got the shots. So this is an experimental technology. So Ed Dowd went into the disability data of the United Kingdom. Interestingly, in 2020, there was about a 1.7% change in cancer rates above expected. In 21, there was a 6.4% increase, but by 22, there was a 35% increase above expected averages. Immunologic abnormalities, interesting. Again, spike protein causes all these autoimmune issues and inflammatory cell issues. Immunologic abnormalities in 20, they were up 16% with COVID going around. But in 2021, immunologic abnormalities, that's just words with your blood, were up 217%. In 2022, they're up 555%. What new thing did we put into the bodies of 5 billion people? And is this good science? Government databases, we pay for them, they should be open and transparent. And they're being hidden from the people. I'm not going to go through all the cancer mechanisms. What I will tell you, though, is the synthetic mRNA sticks in the body for a long time. Pfizer and Moderna. J&J, not as much, thankfully. But they got rid of that on purpose because they backed the homies they wanted to win. This is from Stanford. 60 days after a shot, the synthetic mRNA is still there. 60 days. 60 days. They stopped the study at 60 days so they could publish. Well, let's look at this. This just came out a week ago from Dr. Broden et al. In Europe. The synthetic spike protein from the vaccines in half of the cohort of patients was still circulating 6 months later. A synthetic product, a synthetic gene, and a synthetic protein. And I already showed you what it can do to the human body. So when is the production of the spike protein stopped? I don't know, I just don't know. Nobody knows. Billions of dollars should be going for the NIH to study all of these things. This is a ragtag fugitive fleet of doctors and scientists trying to figure this out. Because the governments aren't going to say they did something wrong to the people. Because maybe it was intentional. I don't know. I can't prove that. But I can prove something's going wrong. Houston, we do have a problem. And then spike protein binds to tumor suppressor genes. P53, it's the guardian of our genome. It controls tumor suppressor genes. Spike protein binds to it. Here you have the gastric cancer, all the blue dots, all the brown dots in that cancer, every single cancer cell spike protein. Here's a pancreatic cancer, like you mentioned. Every pink dot in that slide from the left, spike protein. Here's a patient who had lymphoma, was doing okay, got a booster, and then on the right you can see how he's doing 3 weeks later. His cancer quadrupled. And what about the vials themselves? Do you want a pure product in your body? Of course you do. You have an attorney general. He or she is responsible for consumer product safety. Well, in Europe, whistleblowers went to their agencies and said, hey, these are only 50% pure mRNA. The half is degraded and impure product. And they said, okay, we'll just lower the standard to 50%. I'm not kidding. And then, they were contaminated as well. Kevin McKiernan, geneticist out of Boston, friend now, found that Pfizer and Moderna's, okay, here's the other one. This is a good story. How many people were in the initial trials in 2020? About 40,000, right? And the control group and the vaccine group. And they give everybody the shot, and they, of course, shortened the placebo group and transferred them all over to high-level data, but that's another story. And at the end of the trial of 40,000 patients with this process that they made this mRNA, they took 350 patients and said, okay, here's process number 2, we're going to manufacture it this way. Not the way we did all the trials on. At the end of the game, they switched the rules of the game and said, we're going to manufacture it this other way. And they made E. coli bacteria make the mRNA. So this little E. coli, these little circle plasmids from E. coli are DNA. And guess what? This RNA product is contaminated with DNA. That is an impure product. It's an adulterated product that shouldn't be on the shelf of any pharmacy in America under consumer protection safety laws, period. We're going to try to do something about that in a couple of states. They're violating the law. And guess what? They're not even making the spike protein in some of these products. We cell cultured these. Comirnaty showed that it wasn't even making spike protein. It was making shorter and longer proteins. It's because they're fragmented. So they're making all sorts of proteins, adulterated products. Science gone rogue. MicroRNA is also known to be a carcinogen. Spike protein goes to the bone marrow. Two science here. The lipid nanoparticles. Fascinatingly, if you look at what they're made up from, The warning on the safety sheet says, this product is not for human or veterinary use. ALC 159, 315, SE 102, blah, 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 blah. Same for Pfizer, same for Moderna. Not for human or veterinary use. But we'll put it into 5 billion people. But it's not for humans or animals. Just so you know. Don't you know? mRNA detected in breast milk for several days after the mom got shots. So where are we now? Well, of course, Booster Palooza. I already told you what to do about that. Yeah, I'm fine. Good for it. How you doing? Not so good. Anyway, don't get a booster, folks. Don't ever get a living out of park on an mRNA shot of any sort, ever. Maybe useful for certain types of cancer where you want a gene to go to every cell in the body, but there's no proven long-term safety of these products. Informed consent, that's the blanks that came in the boxes of the vaccines. We're not sudden death, excess death. These are not the droids you're looking for. Don't look this way. These are not the droids. Well, it's interesting that fake pictures of people dropping in the streets of China cause mass panic about the virus, but live pictures of fit young athletes dropping on sports fields after the fact's nothing to worry about, apparently. And of course, scientists can tell us how a mummy died 10,000 years ago, but can't tell us how people died yesterday. And I do trust the science. But science, coercion is not science. Censorship is not science. Fake data is not science. Manipulating results is not science. Cherry-picking studies is not science. And fear-mongering is not science. What we need is a little outrage. So, anybody's football team lose today? Okay, this is how we feel when our football team loses, right? But our government destroys our business, our family, and our health. Bad. Bad. We need a little outrage, folks. And if you think tough men are dangerous, go till you find out what weak men are capable of. And here we have doctors and nurses pretending they have no idea why healthy young people are having strokes and heart attacks. I think even Stevie Wonder can see why they are. But, let's see, any mental illness in the family? Yeah, my cousin thinks people are dropping dead from climate change. So what does this Trusted News Initiative do to your minds? Well, they tell you the sudden death is nothing to see here, folks. You know, these aren't the droids, of course not. So this is what they tell you. Urgent warning, gardeners, soil is increasing risk of killer heart disease. No, it's solar storms. No, it's the temperature, it's the temperature. No, it's the climate. No, it's your energy bill price rise. It's causing heart attacks and strokes. No, you're breathing too many times in a day, and it could raise your risk of getting a heart attack. But it's not that thing we're stuck in the 5 billion people that's increasing death rates. I mean, in the UK right now, the death rate in children 0 to 18 is still 23% above expected average. In the US, in the young cohort, we're still looking at 20-ish% above expected average excess death rates, et cetera, et cetera. But no, you're shaking your duvet too hard. That's why young people are dying, increasing your chance of heart attack, stroke. Nope, you moved your clock. That's what was causing it. But it wasn't that. It wasn't the Vokey. It wasn't that gene we put into 5 billion people. No, you're smoking too much weed. You're eating the wrong breakfast. Let's see. No. Let's see. The ways cold weather can affect your body from winter vagina to blood clots. Well, I don't want to know what winter vagina is. I do know what blood clots are. So this is what the media is telling you. And in Canada, of course, they're shoveling too much snow. That's what's causing the heart attack. But here we are, conspiracy theorists, watching people catch up to us. And of course, last night I appreciated that the new variant was shared. Deadly new variant, Omicron variant, BS24/7 has been detected. It attacks the truth and insults your intelligence. It's a cold now, folks, for most people. You said you were sick. No, I said have a case of corona. So, unfortunately, really what we need to do is get back to critical thinking. The next generation is being prepared for blind compliance. We're teaching kids in schools to never ask questions, never criticize, simply follow the rules. We need to change that. Critical thinking must be restored to education, and medical education especially. You're not a statistic, you are an individual, you're a valuable human being. Medicine needs to see you that way, your doctor needs to see you that way. We need to build communities and connections. We need to reconnect to the cycles of real life and nature. We need to pursue art, hobby, creativity, humor. We need to get outside. We need to do this, get together. We need connection for mental wellness. Make sure you have a community of some sort. We need sovereignty of mind and spirit. Is your body your own? Saw a book out in the bookstore on property rights. What's the most important property of all? Your physical being. Have they violated property rights of billions of people? I think so. And did we stand up? Who owns your mind? Who guides your thoughts? And don't forget to laugh a little bit. Laughter is the best medicine. It is good for your immune system. Be goofy, be silly, be playful. Don't be blinded like the ostrich on the left. Stay awake like the ostrich on the right, please. What we do need indeed is a great awakening, not a great reset. I invite any of these clowns in Washington or Farming or anywhere to debate anywhere, anytime, because we need public dialogue. Integrity is simple as the distance between our lips and our actions. Simple conclusions: stop these shots, don't take them. Demand transparency from our government. Compensate those who've been injured. Acknowledge them, see them. It's real. Change public health. Return to the patient-physician relationship. Health and wellness don't come from a needle or a bottle or a pill, nor an administrator, nor a medical bureaucrat. You must stand for bodily integrity. If you truly want to follow the science, then follow the silenced. And silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. This is one of my favorites from Eli Weissel. The opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness. It is indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy. It's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death. It's indifference. Don't panic, folks. Be like the fishy on the bottom that's organized. Be like the dog on the beach here with that sign. I highly encourage that behavior. May we have the strength of this stool and the faith of this dog. And remember, there are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true, and the other is to refuse to believe what is true. I've shared some science. Do I know everything? No. Am I willing to be taught? Absolutely. Do I have any ego about any of this? No. Teach me. I'm here to learn. Why? So I can do better on behalf of you, my friend, my patient. That's how every doctor needs to be. You matter first. I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. My 6 daughters and I, and my lovely wife, thank you very much for allowing us to be here. Thank you very much. This is what I love.
So one nice thing about standing ovations is that I don't have to ask you to stand up to let the blood flow get going again, right? So fantastic, and thank you so very much for that. He didn't really necessarily get into it too much, but he and his family have lost a great deal due to their sacrifice. And I think that in and of itself deserves a round of applause. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to be able to wrap up such an event for tonight, such a great event for great attendees. Now, as you have seen throughout this event, the John Birch Society is focused on action and solutions. I'm trying to get the oh. When it's not plugged in. There, ooh, now it's working. And as Mr. Welch used to say, education is our own strategy and truth our only weapon. So let me say this, if you can go away with one thing from this conference tonight, let it be that I must be involved. It's so important that I need to repeat that again. I must be involved. For if I am not, I leave a vacuum that will be filled by the opposition. Your opposition isn't just an entity that wants to tax you more. No, it's actually much worse than that. It wants to run your life, to kill the truth, to take away your choices, your God-given rights, to tell you what you can and cannot do with your property, to teach your kids perversion, to denigrate the sanctity of life and to replace God with government and unleash a worldwide tyranny that no one recovers from. As we've seen over the last several years and right here in Iowa, the next pandemic is here, and that disease is out of control, government. Now, I could spend the next several hours taking you along a timeline from creation to today, showing you the effects of a spiritual war of good and evil, and how that conspiracy has manifested itself throughout those that pull the levers of government. Instead, let me point out what we can and must do as we the people to protect this great experiment of freedom. And let's be clear, we the people mean you and me. It is not some nameless, faceless group of people that will do our civic work for us. Thank you. So I'm scheduled to speak to a group next month in Salt Lake City. So I was on the phone with a gentleman who is sponsoring and hosting the event, and he's on our national council, but only able to be here tonight. He told me that American patriots are a lot like a volunteer fire department. We tend to keep to ourselves, do our own thing, follow our own interests until there is a fire. Then we come together focused on fighting the immediate threat that's in front of us and setting aside any differences we may have. Now, I have to admit there's a lot of wisdom in that assessment. We've seen this in the ag community, haven't we? Farmers focus on their farm until some emergency pulls them together. Farming neighbors usually drop what they're doing and rush over to help. I've seen this in the dairy community many times in Wisconsin, as well as with cranberry growers having grown up and worked on a cranberry marsh. As Americans, we feel a moral obligation and a sense of duty to help our neighbors. So when a neighbor's property is threatened by eminent domain, we feel for that neighbor because it could be our property that's next. They pull together to ensure rights are not trampled and that justice is done. So let's pause and recognize that there is a time and a place for eminent domain to be used, but not for carbon capture pipelines that have sprung up around billions of federal dollars to unsuccessfully combat a problem that thousands of scientists say doesn't exist. Property rights are a foundational principle for a free society. It was President John Adams that said, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, anarchy and tyranny commence. This principle has been so easily discarded over these last few years, especially with the onset of COVID. Now, if you're the type of person who would rather be left alone by government, COVID demonstrated that you will not be left alone. You will be made to care. You will be made to act, whether it's in compliance or in defiance. COVID also demonstrated how fragile freedom really is. For without its vigorous exercise, the American body gets complacent and forgetful, depending more and more upon government and growing more tolerant of an encroaching government that has been loosed from the chains of the Constitution. But much like with a fire or other emergencies, certain heroes emerge. During the government lockdowns, many did not question the unconstitutional edicts, but followed them for what they were told was their own good. Yet others who knew of their rights exercised them and provided heroic examples for all patriots to follow. Much like any humble hero, though, they will admit they were just doing their job. But it's done in the face of adversity, under the damning focus of critics who scream that they are guilty of killing others because they did not go along with tyranny. These brave souls who stood up and declared, "Not on my watch," were doing so under an obligation to protect others. In our American system of government, this is what's known as interpositioning or interposing. Interpositioning occurs when someone in a position of authority or responsibility takes steps to protect others that he or she serves, nullifying the unconstitutional measures. For instance, if President Biden issues a federal mask or shot mandate, then governors, state legislatures, and even county sheriffs can interpose by standing up and declaring that these mandates will not be enforced. Plus, they don't even need to declare it. They can just not enforce it. Attorneys general and other prosecutors can also step forward and declare not to prosecute, or again, just not prosecute. Doing so protects those that they serve. Similarly with those at the local level, they can stand up against decrees or unconstitutional laws that come from above them and not enforce them, protecting their constituents. The same with business owners who protect their customers by not enforcing these unconstitutional mandates, laws, or related rules and regulations. We saw this in many states during the government lockdowns. Sheriffs taking to social media platforms saying they will not enforce the mandates. Our news magazine, as you can see on the screen here, reported on many of these instances. Wisconsin saw nearly a third of its county sheriffs publicly do this, when our Republican-led state legislature failed to act.
Shame on them.
Absolutely, thank you. And have you seen what is going on in Illinois? Their latest gun control bill designed to ban those scary black semi-automatic rifles, as well as large capacity magazines, was enthusiastically signed into law by the governor last year. But when it came time to enforce those measures this year, guess what happened? County sheriffs stood up and said, "Not on our watch." This is Illinois. What are they doing over there? More than 90 sheriffs have publicly declared that they will not be enforcing this, including not jailing those that don't comply. More than 90 sheriffs. You know how many counties are in the state of Illinois? 102. Thank you. So you do the math. Think the constitutional tool like this might be effective here in Iowa? And I don't necessarily mean for gun control. The act of nullification is deeply rooted in Article 6 of the Constitution. And the founders explained this in the Federalist Papers that were written and published in newspapers to help persuade those in the 13 states to accept and ratify the new Constitution. Now, let's not color nullification or interpositioning with the crayon of rebellion or sedition or violence. No, the founders wrote that we have a duty to repel usurpations of power, since the limitations of government were clearly spelled out between the states and the federal. The founders clearly directed that usurpations are null and void and should be handled as such. How many of our county sheriffs here in Iowa understand that concept? Understand that they have an obligation to protect constituents and not the corporate interest of a pipeline company that is currently suing 80 landowners in South Dakota for eminent domain. How many state legislators understand the concept of usurpation of power and have willingly engaged in usurping the rightful power of landowners by placing legislative and judicial power in the hands of 3 people who currently are conducting a kangaroo court in Fort Dodge? Don't hard-working farmers and ranchers deserve better than that? Where are the elected officials who should be imposing moratoriums, strengthening property rights, protecting landowners, and telling corporations that we will not be playing along with their radical, anti-American climate change agenda? And thank God we heard from some of those folks this morning. In reaction to a report on an upcoming government COVID mandates this fall, Governor Kim Reynolds exclaimed this week, "Not on my watch." Well, okay, indeed, that's the right attitude to have. But will her record reflect her rhetoric? It's one thing to talk tough, but the words become useless if there are no actions behind it. In any emergency, we can either have a plan or we can panic. When we panic, we lose because we are unprepared. With government, we are in a constant battle of usurpations. It wants what we, the people, rightfully own, the majority of the power to govern ourselves. And when we are not vigilant, lost ground means lost freedom. And for a free people that spilled blood to gain their independence, lost freedom can be deadly. And perversion of the truth leads to 60 million babies killed in the womb since 1973. Understanding the nature of government and its propensity to grow and tip the scales of control its way offers a healthy dose of reality of which we can plan and prosper. Government will quickly grow outside of its constitutional limitations unless there is a force that keeps it shackled to these limitations. We, the people, are that force that must hold elected officials accountable. Now, about 5 years ago, we were gifted with a set of notebooks that Mr. Robert Welch, founder of the John Birch Society, this great organization, had written years before he founded the society. He spent many years studying why America seemed to be retreating from freedom. As he researched and thought about it, he wrote in one of these notebooks some thoughts that would one day become the basis of our mission statement. He wrote, "The whole tragedy of the 20th century can be summed up in 7 words. Too few morals and too much government." He was right on, wasn't he? And aren't these the 2 main points that make up most of the misery we see today? Too few morals in a society means a need for more government. As John Adams wrote, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Why? Because a moral people need less government as they are more responsive and caring. Too much government is a despotic tool designed to choke the prosperity out of a free society. Knowing your rights and limitations of government are essential in determining your actions. You can either have a plan or you can panic. Those that panic make for a supple population to be molded by government bureaucrats into slaves that invite the proverbial jackboot to the face of civilization. Indeed, big government is a fearful master. Yet the founding fathers envisioned a free society and crafted guidelines that placed the levers of control among we the people. If we could keep it. Looking around today, how well have we kept it? The founders knew firsthand the ills that befall a society under government tyranny. For them, freedom was the cure. Getting government out of the way, but not to the point of anarchy, has demonstrated time and again that a free people will accomplish so much more than central planning. Constructive action involves learning the constitutional limitations and knowing what tools you can utilize to protect your rights. We have, after all, in this country, layers of strength that protect our rights. The very fact that governments around the world have killed more than 100 million of their own people in the 20th century alone should cement in everyone's mind the importance of keeping our republic. The year before he was silenced, Congressman McDonald said, yes, we are at war. Very definitely we have been at war. It's an economic war. It's a war of subversion. It's a war of espionage. It's a war of ideas. It's a war of terrorism. And it's a war of infiltration. When you're not on the battlefield, the enemy wins. But an educated electorate that understands the principles on which this country was founded, knows the constitutional limitations of various levels of government, and exercises accountability of elected officials is a powerful force that can take down even the most entrenched elements of the deep state. The John Birch Society has seen such victory, leading the charge on many battles that would have subverted us into a new world order had we lost. Many of these battles were fought without even most Americans even knowing about them. But doesn't history demonstrate this very fact? That most of the people aren't convinced to get involved, but that it's the tireless, irate minority of patriots that gets the job done. We've stopped the creation of a North American Union that would have replicated the type of government seen in the European Union. We've killed trade bills that would have set up layers of unconstitutional government above that of federal and state governments. We've taught and protected the concept of local police staying loyal to the communities that they serve while staying independent of the federal government. And for decades, we've protected the Constitution from being rewritten and educated elected officials and many others on the powerful tool of nullification that provides immediate relief from tyranny. And we've exposed the collusion between the fake news and big government and gave truth tellers a voice through our news media, helping to preserve the life and health of untold people, especially throughout COVID. Through Freedom Project Academy, we've provided a classical education steeped in the tradition of the Founding Fathers for thousands of K through 12 students who are this country's next generation of patriotic leaders. We're partnering with churches to bring this education to the children of these congregations to help get children away from the dangerous and unconstitutional public school system. We're reaching millions of truth-hungry Americans every month with our new American media and social media outreach. And starting next month, we take this programming to a higher level. We have been forced to because of censorship. No longer will big tech be able to ground us. We will have 5 of our media programs syndicated on one of the most conservative talk radio networks in the country. 2 daily shows and 3 weekend shows will have the potential to reach millions more. And we've helped preserve property rights through boots on the ground, organizing and educational efforts to combat the reach of tyranny. But even with all of this, we need more pullers at the oar. Today, more than ever, those that pull the levers of government are organized against you and all that you hold dear. Yet a highly organized force working on specific agenda items can topple this conspiracy. We don't need to work on everything that the opposition throws at us. As Mr. Welch said, all we must find, build, and use to win is sufficient understanding. And that sufficient understanding comes from numbers. Mr. Welch thought at one time that 1,000 members would be needed in every congressional district. But when he saw the effectiveness that his model of organizational structure had accomplished, he cut that in half and suggested 500 to be that key number. But when that happens, the electorate votes in candidates whom adhere to the Constitution, which obviously cuts down on the size, scope, and cost of government at all levels. We call that the power of 500. The people on this map are our fully salaried field staff professionals, whose job it is to recruit and organize patriotic volunteer leaders who lead our grassroots chapters in all 50 states. Active members of the John Birch Society working through organized chapter activities create that sufficient understanding by being active in their local communities. What this looks like can take the form of neighborhood literature distributions, holding video showings, hosting a speaking event, sharing the voting records of state and federal legislators, having an information table at local community events like gun shows, air shows, car shows, tractor shows, or even other gatherings, and reaching out to like-minded organizations and partnering on local projects, among other activities, just like we do here in Ottawa. For 65 years, the John Birch Society has led the fight for less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world. If it wasn't for the John Birch Society, this country would have already been swallowed up into a new world order under world government. We have a plan to defeat the enemy and have worked at it successfully for many years. But look around. The Republic is precariously perched on the precipice of disaster, and which way it slides is in large part due to the involvement of its patriots like you. In 1780, Sam Adams wrote, "If ever the time should come when vain and aspiring men should possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." Well, ladies and gentlemen, that time is now. And this country is in high need of its patriots to prevent its ruin. Will you answer his call? We're honored to help Iowans and beyond, to educate the electorate, to help exercise rights, and to protect what we all hold dear. We'd be honored to have you in the audience tonight to join us in our epic undertaking, and only together can we win. And with God's help, we definitely will win. If you're not a member, now is the perfect time to join. See any of our staff tonight or go to jbs.org. My many thanks to you and our wonderful speakers for your attendance, your patriotism, and for your action. May God continue to bless your efforts, guide our steps, and bless a humble nation that seeks his face. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you feel encouraged. You know, I know this is sort of the choir, right? And in church, we always say when you leave the doors, that's the mission field. The way I see most of what I do is we have spiritual alignment with our familial alignment. But we also have a civic alignment. Together they make a cross. And our civic responsibility is to the people to our left and the people to our right. And before we leave, I wanted to give one last round of applause for Lisa, for Tammy, for our great hosts here, Ms. Scott and her family. There's a lot of work that goes into events. get in contact with Car Firearms to have them donate a CW9. I hope you were able to get a raffle ticket, and I feel no greater way to end this off, this freedom exercise and an exercise of the Second Amendment. So if you have your tickets, let's get those tickets out, because we're going to have Dr. Cole do the honors of drawing. Do it. That one was in your hand.
Mr. Scott.
All right. So I'll read all the numbers here. 939 17. I think that last number. 7. 177. I thought somebody would be coming down, running down like the Price is Right.
They wrote our names on them.
Ted Kroll. Are you here, Ted? Congratulations. Ted, just come see me over here. I need to get your information so we can get this wonderful firearm for Car Firearms to you, okay?
Keep in mind for next year, it's better out than Powerball.
Thank you all.
With that, we'll just say thank you all so very much for caring about your country enough to take the time to learn. So now you can talk to your neighbors, right? Don't leave it here. You all heard about the Sea of Galilee, right? But you've heard about the Dead Sea, right? And the Jordan. The Jordan feeds into the Dead Sea, right? One is teeming with fish, one not so much. You know what the difference is? One is stagnant. It doesn't have any outlets. Nothing leaves the Dead Sea. So take this information, share it with your friends. Tomorrow in church, over the pew, before the pastor starts. Over the pew, over the backyard fence, don't leave it here. The time is now. God has placed each and every one of us right here in America, right now, for this time. Let's make it count.